Good afternoon. We'd like to ask if everyone could please take your seats. We'd like to start the seminar. If you have an application for a hurricane hang tag, you can fill the application out while we're going through the seminar, and then we'll issue the tag to you when we're finished. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, taking time out of your busy schedule to attend the seminar. We have a host of, a group of speakers from Lee County in the emergency management field, a very well experienced group. First will be Dave Roberts. He's the city's weather consultant. After that, Jim Biosted. Jim is the Chief of Emergency Management for the Lee County Public Safety Department. Following Jim, we'll have Sandra Tapfumine. Sandra is the Chief of Operations for the Lee County Emergency Operations Center. And then we'll have Harold Law. Harold is our building official. And then myself, I'm Lieutenant William Dalton, and I'll finish things up. I'd like to take a second to point out also in attendance today is Chief Tomlinson from the Police Department, Assistant Chief Scott from the Fire Department, Chief Fredericks from Captiva Fire Department, and one of our councilmen, Mick Denham, is in attendance. I can't see Mick right now, but he's here also. There he is. Okay, so to start it off, Dave Roberts will kick things off for us, and we'll get the seminar going. Thank you. Clicker is right there.
Oh, this is the click right here?
Right, push it forward.
There we go. Where you got it? Good afternoon. How is everyone today? We appreciate you coming out with such beautiful weather outside today. And we're talking about hurricanes nonetheless. How many of you are new to these hurricane seminars? Okay, that's a good turnout. We appreciate that. We've been doing this for several years. It's part of our annual plan to get you folks ready for hurricane season. The good news is we haven't had a hurricane in a little bit here on Sanibel, which is certainly great news. But we also have gone through periods of time where we've had a significant amount of hurricanes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what causes some of the hurricanes that we see. We're going to get to the predictions for this year's hurricane season. And we're going to talk also about the real risks historically that Sanibel faces from storms, so we can get some of the misinformation out of the way and also explain a little bit about it. Well, hurricane season runs from June 1st through November 30th. It will remain that way for time to come, although I think Sanibel Council is talking about possibly changing the dates. No, I'm just kidding. No, they're not in charge of that. June 1st through November 30th. A couple people laugh. That's good. Not the council people though. June 1st through November 30th is where we have hurricane season. It's a 6-month period out of the year. Now, that doesn't mean we won't get hurricanes outside of that time period. Believe it or not, there have been hurricanes recorded in every month out of the year in the Atlantic, Caribbean, or Gulf of Mexico. So keep that in mind. But the core is the 1st of June, this Sunday, through November 30th. Now, here's a little video I wanted to show you. I'm not sure it's going to roll for you there. Is it moving? I can't tell if it's moving or not. No, it looks like it's not moving. Well, anyway, this is to give you an idea as to what happens when the winds start to pick up. I'm going to go past this frame, though, because it's just not wanting to work with me. Hurricanes typically form in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. I've marked the paths there that most of these storms take. And, of course, the source of hurricane formation, warm water. Anything that is 80 degrees or above, guess what? We're already there. Our water temperature is well into the 80s, and it's going to top out, believe it or not, very close to 90, if not in the low 90s, usually close to Labor Day weekend. Now, the peak of hurricane activity for the Atlantic season, which is what we consider this, is typically in September. You can see how it just spikes up right there. The red color indicating hurricanes in general, the blue color indicating hurricanes and tropical storms. So if you're looking for a hurricane, September is the month to do it. October and November, it trends down, and for June and July, you don't expect very much, but in August, that's where we have to start really paying attention. Here are some of the named storms by month, and you can see that September really is the primary month. August is a secondary month, and then the third busiest month would be October. So those are the 3 core months, right around Labor Day, give or take a few weeks either way. And then, of course, when it comes to, we call the real Atlantic hurricane season, your major hurricanes, 92% of those hurricanes are going to happen during that core period that we're talking about. 92% of the major hurricanes will happen between August and October, and that's the way it's been since about 1950. We've talked about what causes the hurricanes. You need a source of warm water. Guess what? We've got plenty of it. The Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, the Atlantic Ocean. It is all there. So when the water temperature is 80 degrees or warmer, and that's not a number that is arbitrarily picked, it's just physics has shown that that's exactly where it happens. Moisture tends to evaporate into the atmosphere, and you get the complexes, the smaller little systems, the tropical waves, then the tropical disturbances, and then the tropical depressions in that order. Then they start forming into tropical storms when they become more organized. It's very random. Okay, there's no rhyme or reason. You can, this is what will happen. You'll watch the Weather Channel, and you'll see wave after wave after wave coming off Africa, and you'll think, oh my gosh, you'll probably see about 50 waves a hurricane season, but they don't all turn into a tropical system. And we also have systems that form in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, and they don't all form into a system either. So it's almost like you have to do a play-by-play analysis with each storm that develops, and that's kind of what my job is as these storms form. Now, Lieutenant Dalton asks every year that I plot all the hurricanes from 1850. So I usually set aside a few weeks and with minimal sleep, and I put all the lines down here. I'm going to ask him later if I missed any, but these are all the hurricane tracks from about 1871 through present. Florida's in there somewhere, and so are we. So you get the idea that hurricanes are very active. But let's talk about what really Sanibel has to worry about. On average, and I went back, looked at numbers all the way back to about 1870, and I had to average here and average there because obviously there's not a lot of data once you start getting, there's not a lot of Sanibel history once you start getting back to the 1870s or 80s, but Sanibel on average will see a tropical storm or a hurricane every 2.5 years. Does that seem often? It does a little bit, and the reason for that is because of the way history plays out. We go through decades of time where sometimes we see a lot of storms and a lot of hurricanes, and then sometimes we go through decades which we hardly see any storms. But hurricanes happen almost every 8 years. That's the thing to keep in mind. The average peak of hurricane activity for Sanibel is September 7th through the 27th. And one of the interesting things I wanted to point out, this is something new to me because normally I've always focused on September 7th through the 14th. But after I went back and looked at the data, there's now a lot more to indicate, especially in the last 50 years, a lot more storms happening later on during the month of September. So it's something to keep in mind. These numbers that you see all over the screen, I don't want you to pay too much attention to them, but you can see if you lived in Miami or if you live in Cape Hatteras or you live close to New Orleans, you really need to worry about hurricanes because they're the peak. We are what I would call a secondary or a third tier when it comes to these types of storms. The last hurricane that really impacted Sanibel was Wilma in 2005. Now that storm was a lot different than the year before in which we had Charley, but I'm just letting you know it's been, no joke, 9 years. 9 years since we have seen a hurricane come within about 50 miles of Sanibel. Then we had Tropical Storm Faye, which came by in about 2008. The longest gap between hurricanes for Sanibel, you ready for this? 40 years. When I first started doing these hurricane seminars, I used to get up there all the time and say, it's been 40 years since we've had a hurricane here. We were talking about Hurricane Donna. And I got away with that routine until Charley came along in 2004. We've gone as long as 16 years between tropical storms. The good news to tell you, and I know the Chamber of Commerce will be very happy that I'm mentioning this, 20 plus cities in Florida are way ahead of Sanibel as far as hurricane activity. So we are not at the top when it comes to hurricane activity, but we're not at the bottom either, so don't take it the wrong way. These are just the major hurricanes that Florida has seen since 1851. These are not all the hurricanes and these are not all the tropical storms. These are the major hurricanes. And you can see the path that Charley took just 10 years ago across the area, very close to us here. In fact, here's a radar image showing Charley as it moves at its closest point to Sanibel. And let me tell you something. That was a day that most folks will not forget. Anybody go through Charley in the area? Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These meetings proved to be so important. The people that came here to the hurricane seminars, picked up the knowledge, were light years ahead of everybody else as far as being prepared for a hurricane. No joke. That was the year that Sanibel, the city government, and everybody proved a lot of what they were worth, because we had a lot of things to deal with in this storm, and it was a doozy. And it could have even been worse. As bad as it was, it could have been worse, as the folks in Charlotte County found out. This is just the wind damage that resulted from Charley. And you can see most of Sanibel's covered up there with the 100-mile-an-hour winds, but you go just a short distance inland, for instance, Lehigh Acre, South Fort Myers itself, and they were almost out of the hurricane threat to begin with. But this was a very small hurricane. In fact, Charley's the smallest major hurricane to ever make landfall in United States history. Now, why did Charley turn? This has always been a big thing of controversy, and I just touch on this because this was a big deal. Back then, we had a lot of national media outlets flooding to Florida, and they were all going to Tampa. They weren't mentioning Sanibel. They weren't mentioning anything about this area. I said a couple things. I was working in television here at the time. I said a couple things on TV. I started receiving death threats within about 5 minutes. People saying, you just want doom and gloom. And I said, no, this could turn and come this way. And sure enough, that's what wound up happening. And it came very close to us, and it was this front across the Gulf of Mexico that deflected Charley. That front is a common feature in weather. Hurricanes, here's a little trick. Hurricanes are always trying to turn to the right. That's their tendency. That's their nature. They're always trying to turn to the right. They don't always move in straight lines. They wobble quite a bit, but there's always a curvature to the right. And that's, you could see, had it gone to Tampa, it would have been more of a straight, but it actually turned to the right and went inland over southwest Florida. And that was a miscalculation on the part of a lot of folks. The great news about the world we live in today is we have access to information. In fact, you have to close your eyes, close your ears to ignore the information. The problem is we almost have too much information where it just flows out there and it turns into misinformation. So let's put things in perspective. It's been 9 years since we've had a brush with a hurricane here. But what does that mean for hurricane seasons? Well, interestingly enough, out of the top 5 hurricane seasons, about 5 out of the last 10 years have actually fallen into the top 5. Yet, we have not had a hurricane, or at least look at Charley. Charley's not on here. 2004 is not on here. That wasn't one of the busiest seasons. So I don't want you to equate a busy hurricane season with a great chance that we're going to get a hurricane. We can get a hurricane out of any season, a quiet season or whatever. 2004 was a quiet season. 1992, one of the quietest hurricane seasons on record. And does everybody remember what storm hit in 92? Andrew. So this is 2004. This just shows you the areas that were affected in Florida by hurricanes that year. And you could see Central Florida was not the place to be. It was the crossroads of Florida, all right, but they dealt with 4 hurricanes. Here we only had to deal with 1 coming by. Primary hurricane tracks, the ones that we really start to pay attention to here, are the ones that are coming out of the Atlantic because they gain momentum. And you can see the number 3 one we don't care about. That track goes out to sea. The number 2 one, though, is a little bit farther south, and that was more of a Charley formation, forming in the southern area of the Atlantic and then moving into the Caribbean and then making that turn up through Cuba and affecting us. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are the numbers for this hurricane season? Because even though I always tell people I can't stand hurricane season forecasts, the first thing they ask me when they see me in a grocery store is, Dave, what's the hurricane season forecast? So the 30-year normal is we see about a dozen tropical storms and or hurricanes. We lump them together during a hurricane season. About half of those are hurricanes, and out of those 6 hurricanes, 2 of them are major. So about a third of all hurricanes are major hurricanes. The prediction from Colorado State, and we use them as a benchmark because they've been doing it the longest. They're right now suggesting that there'll be 9 tropical storms, 3 hurricanes, and 1 major hurricane. And this is their forecast they just revised as of last week. Now, all they're talking about is the formation, the quantity of hurricanes. It's important to remember that. But all it takes is just 1 storm to affect our area. 2013 was supposed to be an active year, yet there were no major hurricanes. In fact, not 1 major hurricane happened in 2013. And when I say happened, I mean formed in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or the Gulf. Just didn't even form. And we had the fewest hurricanes since 1982. So again, 2013 was supposed to be an active year. People, by the time the season came off, they were like, okay, well, we want our money back. Florida has not been hit by a hurricane since 2005. 9 years. That's the longest stretch in Florida history in modern times that Florida has gone without a hurricane strike. 9 years. And the U.S. has not been hit by a major hurricane. They've been hit by other hurricanes, but they've not been hit by a major hurricane since 2005. What are some of the factors that are going to possibly help us this year? El Nino, and we've talked about El Nino before. That's the warming of the Pacific Ocean, and it creates shear because the Earth, the climate must always be in a balance. And with the climate always in a balance, when you have warm water in the Atlantic, or in the Atlantic, you're going to have cold weather in the Pacific. When you have warm water in the Pacific, you're going to have the inverse. You're going to have cold water in the Atlantic. So it's believed that this year we're going to have cooler water in the Atlantic, and we're going to have more shear, which will create more problems for hurricanes. Nobody's complaining about that, I can tell you that right now. The biggest thing we worry about here on Sanibel, we have a few things we have to worry about with hurricanes, but the biggest thing, of course, is storm surge. And to give you a little familiarization with that, normal sea level, you can see there, it's a bad drawing of the Sanibel Lighthouse, I know, forgive me. Winds shoving water toward the coast in the middle, and then at the bottom, that's what happens when the wind really picks up. A lot of folks are confused. They think it's the pressure of the hurricane that actually lifts the water itself. It's the wind, so don't be confused by that. And this just shows you what happens when you get a storm surge. You have your normal storm, mean sea level, and then you have a storm surge on top of it, then you have waves, then you have a high tide. It's not a good scenario. 1 foot of moving water is enough to knock you to your feet. 2 feet's enough to move a car. So it's very important to note. When I first started doing these seminars, I kid you not, there was always somebody in the crowd who would come up to me at the end and they'd say, I heard everything you said. I know we live on an island, but Dave, just curious, what's the highest point on the island, just so I know? There aren't many hills in Sanibel. Some of the changes that we are seeing, they're getting rid of this, a lot of gobbledygook this year with a lot of the forecasts that come out. We used to have a thing where they give us all kinds of wind parameters so we could tell you what the wind would be. Well, a lot of folks took that to mean, well, it wouldn't be that bad of a storm. But what we are adding this year, which is really helpful, is we have storm surge maps, which will really give us a great indication as to what to expect, especially here in Southwest Florida and Sanibel. And as you notice in this particular storm, Hurricane X, Sanibel's not doing too good. It's being covered up there quite a bit. So you need to keep that in mind. The best thing is when a storm's threatening and when the city tells you you got to go, you need to listen. That's what it comes down to. The cost of fleeing a storm. You say, well, it's so inconvenient to leave and it costs money. Well, yeah, it'll cost you about $1,000, possibly. You know what it costs you if you lose your life, or if you're injured, or if you're stranded here and they can't get to you. You have to weigh those costs. We have a lot of tools that we're using now in tracking hurricanes. The top image is of the hurricane hunters, the C-130s. And then we have the new buoys that actually have motors on them. That's at the bottom. And then, of course, what would life be without drones? So on the right-hand side, you actually see the new drones that they're deploying this year to survey hurricanes. The hurricane hunters can only fly for a certain amount of hours, and they involve human beings. Drones can fly up to 24 hours. They don't complain. No, I'm just kidding. They can fly for 24 hours. They can fly through the storm continuously, and they can report back all of the data, a lot of different data that we need, and we don't risk human lives in the process. So it's really a good thing. The most important message I can share with you is Sanibel gets impacted by hurricanes. We know that. Doesn't happen every day. But the reality is we live in Florida, a peninsula that sticks out into a body of very warm water. We are on the hurricane highway, if you will. Wouldn't necessarily call us an off-ramp, but we're close to an off-ramp of the hurricane highway. Obviously, the Florida Keys, the Carolina coast, parts of New England are in the direct path of a lot of these storms. And when storms affect us, they don't stop here. They come across our area. But it's very important to remain prepared. And when you're prepared, you will not be afraid of dealing with these storms when and if we have our next chance. Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. History has proven that to us. So thank you for your time. We'll take questions at the end of the seminar. Lieutenant Dalton's going to come on back up here now and get us cued to the next thing. Should I move this over here? All right. And you want me to introduce Jen? Okay. Thank you again for your time, everyone. Let's have a quiet hurricane season.
Thank you, Dave. Our next speaker will be Jim Bjosted from the Lee County Emergency Operations Center. Jim comes to us with a lot of experience as a former officer in the Coast Guard who worked some major hurricanes, but he'll explain all those details to you now. Jim, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I can't tell you how happy I am to be standing here in front of you, and how happy I am that my friends and neighbors Mick Denham and Dan Mater came here to give me a little moral support. Exactly 1 year ago today, I was sitting about where that gentleman is in the last row next to the camera as a part-time resident, dreaming of actually getting to live here like many of you. And 2 days ago, I moved here. So I'm a happy guy. Now, some people may say, well, why would a guy that understands hurricanes want to live on a barrier island? And it's because it's a beautiful place to live. And they say, well, what happens if your house washes away? And I say, that's why I have insurance. It may be 40 years. I'm willing to take the chance to live at a wonderful place like this. Just a little bit about me. Why did I come here? I was in the Coast Guard for 29 years, and 3 of those years I was in Mobile, Alabama, where I was responsible for all the Coast Guard activities in Mississippi, Alabama, and the Panhandle. And the first of those 3 years, I had 5 hurricanes in 11 and a half months, starting with Ivan and ending with Katrina. And in between was Arlene, Cindy, and Dennis, of which Dennis was a nasty little storm. So not by choice, but just by having been there at that particular time and being an incident commander for 5 hurricanes, I speak fluent hurricane. And what I'm going to tell you is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I hope you believe me. All hurricanes are different. They have wind, they have surge. Some have a lot of wind and no surge. Some have a little wind and a lot of surge. We used to say, well, a Cat 1 hurricane would have this much surge and a Cat 2 would have this much surge. And what we've learned through science, and Dave alluded to this to a certain extent, is that we don't really know until the storm gets fairly close how high the surge is going to be and how much wind we're going to have. And frequently we have this phenomenon where a hurricane will hit in one place and the surge will hit 50 to 100 miles to the right. That happened with Hurricane Dennis, where it tore up Navarre Beach with a very small surge, but put 12 feet of water in Apalachicola and took out a lot of one-story homes. So the reason I tell you this is that anybody that says, oh, well, I'll ride out a Cat 1. Would you ride out a Cat 1 if you lived in a single-story house and there was a 12-foot surge coming? I hope not. So what we do is working with our partners here in the city and the other municipalities in Lee County. We get the best science we can from the National Hurricane Center, our National Weather Service friends, and we make recommendations based on what we know as early as we know it for any storm in which Lee County is inside the cone of uncertainty. Now, everybody's seen the cone of uncertainty on the nice map when a hurricane's coming? And there's a nice black line that goes right through the center, and that tells you that Charley's going to Tampa, right? You understand? The cone of uncertainty means it's going to be somewhere in that cone. It could be on the right edge, it could be on the left edge, and we won't know until it hits. The cone gets smaller the closer we get, but the closer we get, the less time we have to get 660,000 people, in the worst case scenario, evacuated from Lee County. So we give our best advice early to the Board of County Commissioners who will issue evacuation orders. I don't tell anybody what to do. I tell you what I know. The county commissioners issue an evacuation order, and your elected leadership, county commissioners, the city council, make their decisions based on what we say, what they know, and so on. But the key thing to remember is to evacuate all 660,000 people from Lee County should we have a Hurricane Katrina, Mississippi situation, because that's really the worst case scenario for us, take about 48 hours to evacuate everybody. Guess when I'm going to have a real good idea of how much surge we're going to get? 48 hours before it hits, because it takes that long to do the computer models and so on. So again, I'm not trying to make you scared, but I'm trying to help you understand something that I say to a lot of folks recently. Respect the wind, but fear the surge, because the wind will hurt you. The surge will kill you if it's high enough and you're not prepared. And those that say, I'll go to high ground, I learned from Katrina, high ground you're sharing with the gators and the snakes. So, I hope I have everyone's attention. These are the evacuation zones for Lee County. You will be probably stunned to see that Pine Island and Sanibel and Captiva and Upper Captiva and Fort Myers Beach, they're all A. They're all red. They all low-lying. That's the first thing that we need to do if there's going to be a storm surge that's going to be a dangerous one, even if it's only going to be 6 feet or 7 feet. We need to get people out of there. We need to get them out of there for 2 reasons. One, because if we don't get you out of there early, everybody else will be evacuating and the roads are going to be jammed. And two, if we don't get you out of there early, the causeway is going to be, you're not going to be able to drive across the causeway. Because remember, you get 2 feet of water, it'll move a car. You may get on the causeway, you won't get across it. You'll get washed into the bay. So when we say there's going to be, based on science, based on our best estimate, there's going to be such a height of surge, and we recommend evacuating Zone A. If you're in Zone A, I strongly recommend you go. And don't wait until then to call the Hilton up in Orlando, because everybody else will have already called them. I want you all to think about thinking ahead. What are you going to do if? And think about it now so that you have a place to go or you have a plan on which way to go and so on, because at the last minute it gets very scary. You'll also see the Cape and some other parts to the south. There's Zone B, which are not quite as vulnerable, and then Zone C and so on. You'll notice way out in the eastern part of the county, that's Zone E. That's the highest part of the county, and that's the least likely to suffer a surge. But what's particularly important about those of us that live in the Sanibel Captiva area, we are A, and we need to think hard about not being here if there's a bad surge coming. I know Dave showed you this, and just one thing I wanted to add. This is the product that I'll get 48 hours before landfall. It's tailored for each hurricane. The National Hurricane Center will tell me what the potential storm surge flooding prediction is in 48 hours for any particular storm. So don't be confused where you see that there's different colors there. What they're saying is this is how much water they predict there will be. Now, and most of you in here that live in single-story homes have countertops and dining room tables and the like. Anybody want to hazard a guess about how high above the ground your dining room table and your countertops are in your kitchen? 36 inches, that's 3 feet. What if you get 3.5 feet of water? Where are you going to go? And that's why when folks say, well, it's only going to be a storm surge of 3 feet or 4 feet, I can live with it. Well, where? Because you're going to be standing on your dining room table and the water's coming up around your ankles. And it gets worse. And this is what I'd like to share with you. Up in the middle there, you'll see a nice pretty red roof. Well, it used to be red, now it's kind of brown. That was a brand new Coast Guard station of mine in Gulfport, Mississippi. It was built to the best standards you can imagine, steel frame, 155 mile an hour rated roof and shingles and stuff. What a great building. As you can see, the roof performed as advertised. The rest of the building's gone. That was a beautiful, well-built federal building. And you say, well, what the devil happened to that? The surge. 24 to 28 feet of surge hit Gulfport, Mississippi. Now, when I say Katrina, what do you think of? You think of New Orleans and all those poor folks that are caught on overpasses. Well, folks, New Orleans had a hurricane, but they had a flood. Their levees failed. Mississippi had the surge, and the entire coast of Mississippi was inundated, and Gulfport, Mississippi is in the middle of Mississippi. Now, this picture is what I'd really like you to pay attention to, because this is what gives me the message. This is what gives you my message the most clearly. If you look at the top, that's the Gulf of Mexico. If you look at the bottom, you'll see a whole lot of stuff that looks like mulch. The mulch at the bottom is all of the houses that used to be on all of those gray foundations you see between that, what looks like mulch, and the water. The storm surge came in at 24 to 28 feet across the entire coast of Mississippi. And it doesn't come in as a big wave. It comes in and it rises and it rises and it rises, and it gets high enough and it hits the first house and it pushes it back. And the first house hits the second house and it pushes it back. And pretty soon you have 10 to 20 houses piled up like mulch when you get about a quarter-mile inland or so. So if you want to survive, if you want to be safe, if you want to be smart, if the surge is coming, and the wind's another story, because you make your decision based on the wind, but if the surge is coming, you need to really think about getting out and getting out early. You know, your life is worth far more than anything that's in your house or my house. I've already made the decision. If I lose my house, I lose my house. I will be heartbroken. But I intend to survive, and I'd like all of you to survive. Remember what I said, if nothing else. Respect the wind, but fear the surge. 158 people died in their homes in Mississippi because of the surge from Hurricane Katrina. Many of them inside their attic. And the reason I know that is I sent helicopters out because people had their cell phones and they were calling 911. And the State Emergency Operations Center in Jackson got a number of these calls, and they were able to give me coordinates, and we were able to send helicopters where they lowered those brave young Coast Guard men and women from the helicopter onto a rooftop, which was at the coordinate that they said the cell phone was at, and they chopped through the roof, through the asphalt shingles and through the sheeting and through the plywood to create a hole big enough to pull people out of those roofs. And they pulled dozens of people out of their roofs as the water was rising inside their attic. 158 didn't make it. And in case you think, well, these must have been misinformed folks, 27 members of the Waveland, Mississippi Police Department were in their concrete block building in Waveland, Mississippi when the surge came up from Katrina, which they were not expecting. And they had to actually destroy the door because their door opened out. They had to destroy their door to swim out, to swim up onto the roof. And then when the roof was covered, they swam to tall trees, and they held onto each other and onto the trees for 12 hours until the water dropped down enough. Every one of them survived, but it was, oh my gosh, it was by the grace of God, I got to tell you. So, as I said, if you remember nothing else, please respect the wind, but fear the surge. And now my colleague, Sandra Tapumene, is going to talk to you about another important part of the stuff that we do for you at Lee County Emergency Management, and that's emergency shelters and ways that you can be better informed about what's going to happen. And as Dave said, we'll be waiting for questions afterwards, and I'll stay here as long as you like. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to see so many of you here today, and I know that Jim would agree with me. We spend most of our time trying to get people excited about getting prepared, so for us, this is just a beautiful thing to see that this place is packed. So congratulations for wanting to be prepared and wanting more information. My name is Sandra Tapumene. I'm the Operations Chief for Lee County Emergency Management, and a big bulk of what we plan for during the year is making sure that we have shelters that are going to be safe, and we have good relationship with the school district. Most of our shelters are schools, but we also have some other locations. Here you see Alico Arena in the picture, also one of our shelters out at FGCU. What we will do when we issue an evacuation order, or recommend that the BOCC does that, we need to make sure that shelters are open so that people who don't have the means to go outside of the county or maybe don't have friends that live inland have the opportunity to have a safe place to go. Now, what we say is that to keep in mind that shelters should not be your plan A. They are the lifeboat, not a cruise ship. So if you can remember that, that would be great. There will be food there for you, but we don't have cots, and you'll definitely make a whole bunch of new friends. You'll be there with, at least 1,000 or more people potentially in some of these shelters. So just keep that in mind. If you do have any dietary needs or you decide to come to a shelter, then please make sure that you do bring those medications, anything that you're going to need for at least 3 days is what we recommend. We will have general public shelters. That's for everybody. Also, we'll have at least one pet shelter open. And as far as the pet shelter is concerned, if you are bringing your pet with you, we do need you to bring a cage and as well as food, leash. And the way that works is we do have an area in the shelter, in the shop area of this is South Fort Myers High School is our primary pet shelter. So the pets stay there, and animal services from the county are there to assist in watching over the animals. But then you can come and kind of check out your animal and take them for walks and spend time with them. But then we do have like a living dormitory area that you will be staying in. We have also a special needs shelter, and this is something that if you are dependent on electricity for a medical need, then we do need you to sign up in advance for this shelter. And Debbie Quimby in our department was wonderful. If you have any questions about the special needs shelter, we have some pamphlets in the back table. Please take one and contact her. But we do need you to pre-register for this. And this is a shelter that does have generated power, so it will be, there will be electricity there. Also, hospital sheltering is part of the special needs program. And just to be clear, it's not that you're going to be admitted into the hospital. This is truly just to get you a bed, and you're going to be, the Department of Health assists us with determining when people apply for a special needs application, who should be sheltering in the hospitals. But we encourage you just to apply, and then we can work with you to determine where the best place is for you to be. As far as transportation, when we do activate the shelters, we work with Lee-Tran in order to make sure that we can help people that need rides to the shelters to make sure they can get there safely. So what's going to happen is that every bus stop is going to turn into a shelter pickup point, and then we're going to have transfer areas, and once people get to the transfer areas, there'll be other shuttles running you to the open shelter. Now, I know that on Sanibel, you guys don't have a designated bus stop, but we'll be working with Bill and Lance and your team to figure out if there is a need out here, and Lee Tran has said that they would be happy to come out, run a bus if there's people that need rides. So if you're in that category, we encourage you to communicate that with your emergency management folks here so that we know ahead of time and can arrange transportation for you. And just a few other tools and resources for you, and I should mention that we do have an all hazards guide in the back. It's an orange kind of looking form. I know a lot of you picked it up on your way in, but that guide has all of the information that I'm about to go over, so don't feel like you need to take notes, but we encourage you to grab one on your way out. But we do have Code Red in the county. Both Sanibel has an account as well as us at the county level for emergency management. And this system allows us to send a mass notification out. Right now it is tied to the E911 system, which will go to your home phones. So if you don't have a home phone, I encourage you to go to the Code Red site. And again, you can get that in the All Hazard Guide. And you can enter in and register your cell phone. And that will guarantee that you will get messages if we need to alert you. Also, leeeoc.com is our website for the county emergency management, and we do have information about know your zone. For you guys living on Sanibel is pretty easy, you're all A, but we spend a lot of time trying to teach people about what zone they live in. If you have friends in other parts of the county, we encourage you to point them in the direction to figure out what zone they live in. We also have a family emergency plan, and Lance was great in helping us create that and turn it into a fillable plan this year. So all you need to do when you go to our site is just open up the document, and then you can just type in information into the plan. And we've done all the thinking for you, thought of all the questions that you might need to plan for. It gives you information about and challenges you to look at how much food do you actually have, in your house. Can you survive for 3 days if it's taking away refrigeration? Do you have a grill to be able to cook some of that food? And again, this is in the event that, because not every time are we going to evacuate Sanibel. You guys do have a greater chance of evacuating because you're A and you're an island, but there's going to be times when there could be a storm or a tropical storm where you might lose power, but we don't evacuate you. So we do encourage you to go through those steps and make sure that you are fully prepared to shelter in your home for up to 3 days if needed. We're going to do our best to make sure that we have points of distribution and to come out here and set up areas where you can come and get food, water, and ice. But if you have some of these supplies at your home, then that's even better. And then lastly, this is an app that we do have. It's called Lee Evac. There's an app for everything, and we have an app for evacuation. We encourage you to download this app if you have an Android phone or iPhone. It's a free download, and we will be using that to alert people when we are calling for an evacuation. So again, that's Lee Evac. And then if you're active on social media, we do have a Facebook page that we post information for preparedness throughout the year. And we also have 2 Twitter accounts at @LeeEOC and @LCEMFL. And we'll be using those during activations. So again, thank you so much for coming, and we will be sticking around to answer questions. The last thing I did want to mention is that those of you that do have extra time on your hands, we're always looking for volunteers. We have a very active volunteer program, and we have places for you to serve at the EOC during day-to-day time, but then also during an emergency. We do need help with staffing some of these shelters. There are various needs. We know that we're going to have tons of volunteers coming into the county after a disaster. Really, thousands of people could descend upon us wanting to help, and we need people to process those volunteers. So if that sounds like something that you might be interested in, I believe most of the brochures might be gone already, but there is information in that all hazard guide. Just call us and we'll get you plugged in. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. Next, Harold Law, the City of Sanibel building official. He'll come up and he's going to speak to us about the building codes which help preserve property in a storm, and also about the dangers of flooding, both in a hurricane and from extended periods of rain. Thank you, Harold. Thank
you. We don't have any hills here, so we can't do that one, but like this. It don't work. Okay. I want to talk to you about City of Sanibel and the building codes. And we've talked about preparedness, being ready for the hurricane, doing all these different things. I want to take a little different angle here, I'm going to talk to you about how you can save some money. Figured that would be interesting to you all. As property owners on Sanibel, the building department has a big job in trying to maintain all the structures in a certain fashion required by all the insurances. I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance. There's three prongs to your insurance policy. You have homeowners insurance, you have wind insurance, and you have flood insurance. Because of the building department, on your homeowners insurance, we're graded at, all building departments across the state of Florida are graded on how well they do. And hopefully, not hopefully, but gratefully, we're rated at a 3, which gives you a 15% discount on your homeowner's insurance. That being that we enforce the building codes by the state of Florida, that's adopted by the state of Florida, but we also work with the people here when you remodel and do projects. We try and help you look at ways in which you remodel your homes and which will save you money. And that comes into the other 2 tiers, which is the flood insurance, which is run by FEMA. And FEMA looks at many different aspects of your home. The biggest thing they look at is elevation. There's been a lot of changes in FEMA in the last few years. And if they keep changing it, I don't know what we're going to do. I guess we'll have to hang all our houses by the clouds or something to keep from being flooded, but that's what they're looking for. Also, they look for, in the city, is flood mitigation, keeping your drainage clean, making sure your lot's all drained. They don't want to see people with multiple flood insurance claims. We have a few on the island. When I first came here, we only had 9. That was 11 years ago. After Charley and Wilma, we have multiple claims on property of 63 now, which puts us into really have to do some reporting more than we used to, but that's okay. With that project and with FEMA, we're rated a 5, which is the highest ranking in the state of Florida. There's 19 other cities besides us that are ranked at a 5, and that gives you a 25% discount in your flood premiums today. And then the last, and one that you just love to hear about, is the wind mitigation insurance, and that's with Citizens, part of the state of Florida program. And in theirs, they look for how you hold your building together and what your building's made out of and how you protect the openings like your windows and doors and things like that. And as we do projects, remodel projects, I try to work with all the homeowners to get them to understand that putting in a better door or a better window, or even putting a secondary water membrane under your roof saves you money. A few years ago, the planning director re-roofed his house, and he asked me, what would you do? Would you put this secondary water membrane under the roofing before it's cost, $2,000 more to put it under my roof? I said I would do that. He did it, and he come back and hugged me afterwards. He received $1,000 a year reduction in his premium for wind mitigation. So it paid for itself in 2 years. With that being said, I'll try to watch all your properties to give you the best discount I possibly can get for you. After the storm, the building department will be very busy repairing things, but before the builders can come out and repair things on the island, the building department is in charge of a group of employees we have now that are called the structural safety inspectors. We come on the island just after the police sweep. We evaluate all the structures on the island and give a report to FEMA before anybody can come back on the island. In that Evaluation, that is an exterior evaluation of your property. We don't go into people's houses and look around. It's a strictly in the yard, around your house, and to the next. During Charley, we used a volunteer group that we had formed. Now we have a paid group, but the volunteer group in 2.5 days evaluated every structure on this island and turned it into FEMA. So we feel pretty good about that. Then we were asked by the county to go evaluate Captiva for them because they couldn't get there. So with that being said, that's what the building department does and some of the things the city does for you, the homeowner. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. We're going to take a short break. We have to change a tape in the camera that we're using to film this, and then we'll resume. And when we pick up, I'll speak to the audience about our past experiences with hurricanes, specifically Hurricane Charley. This year will be the 10th anniversary of when Charley hit. I'll show everyone some of the damage that the city did occur, and then we'll show you what the city government does for the community before, during, and after the storm. But we'll take a quick break now for the IT equipment. Okay, I'd like to thank all of our partners in the emergency management community that have spoken so far. We're going to take a little bit of a different turn with the seminar now, and like I had said, this summer will be 10 years since Hurricane Charley. And as we saw when Dave asked in the beginning, there's generally, it's less than 50% of any audience we speak to was actually here during Charley. So we're going to go through and explain what the city does for the community, or what the city government does for a community during a hurricane event, and we're going to show you some of the damage that took place. Basically, our responsibilities are preparation, what we do before a storm, mitigation, it's to help lessen the damage that a storm can cause to the community. If a storm is bearing down on us, we will evacuate. After evacuation, we re-enter, and then we begin the recovery process. I'd like to ask a question of the audience at this time. Does anyone know why we plan for hurricanes? Anyone venture any thought? The guy in the front had the right answer. The number one reason why we plan and go through all this preparation, all the professionals that are up here and dedicate so much time to what we're doing, is to save lives. Being an island, if we want to save lives, it's very likely we're going to have to evacuate, as was explained before. I'd like to show a statistic or a study that a lot of people don't realize, but a consultant in the 2012 Governor's Hurricane Conference came out with a study about the 5 most difficult places to evacuate in the entire country. Southeast Florida was the 5th. That's the Dade-Broward County area. The population is very large there. They do have a lot of infrastructure, but it would still be a very difficult place to evacuate from. Number 4 is New York City, New Jersey coast, mainly because it's one of the most populated areas in the country. They, again, have a lot of infrastructure, but it's difficult to move all the people out of. The Delmarva Peninsula, mainly because that is a peninsula, you got to move everybody up out of the peninsula, and I don't believe they have any major interstate peninsula. The Tampa Bay area, it's the same, that's a peninsula also. It's very densely populated. We do have some interstates in the area, but it's just a difficult place to evacuate from. And the worst place to evacuate from in the whole country is Southwest Florida. Our population has doubled, maybe even tripled in the last 20 years, and we still have 1 interstate that services the area. We have no interstate that travels in an east-west fashion. It's just I-75 that travels north and south. So that's why we stress evacuating early. We're a barrier island, unprotected out in the Gulf of Mexico. If a major hurricane is bearing down on us, we have to start evacuating earlier than every other area in the county. This is Hurricane Charley. Just a graphic. As you can see, it pretty much passes right over the island. The eye was a little further north of us in Upper Captiva, but we felt a lot of the worst effects. The picture on the left is Upper Captiva as it's intact. The picture on the right is Upper Captiva where Charley passed through. They cut a path, or a new pass through the island. This is Sanibel. For a lot of the people who didn't live and experience Hurricane Charley, we had winds of up to 143 miles an hour. The picture of the vegetation down on the left was endemic in probably 20 or 30 areas of the island. Some areas it was 8 and 10 feet high for 100 yards long on periwinkle. It took us 3 or 4 days just to be able to periwinkle. That's a concrete power pole, and that power pole, I believe they're rated to take 200 mile an hour winds, and as you can see, that one snapped, as did many others. There's in the bottom of that picture you see another one laying on the ground in front of the snapped one. This picture encompasses several of the problems we encountered. As you can see, the damaged power pole, the snapped concrete power pole. To the left of that is a generator. The generator is there because right behind it is a lift station. When we lose the power, we lose the lift stations, and we lose the sewer. This is some of the damage. That's the Moon Shadows complex on Middle Gulf Drive. That is the portion of the complex that's closest to the road, closest to Middle Gulf Drive. That's the portion of the complex that is right out on the Gulf. There was a complete porch there. As you can see, that's gone. This is why we stress to evacuate early. If you wait till this point in time, you're likely going to experience the full hurricane effects. We like to remind, as Jim had mentioned, all hurricanes are similar and they contain similar hazards, but no two are alike. This is a graphic of Hurricane Floyd and Hurricane Andrew. They're both Category 4 storms, and as you can see, Floyd is about 3 times the size of Andrew. So a larger hurricane like that will push more storm surge. And the National Weather Service estimated that if Hurricane Charley was the normal size Category 3 storm, it was a small Category 3, if it was the normal size, it would have pushed a wall of water 17 feet high across Fort Myers Beach in Florida. I mean, Sanibel and Captiva. So as bad as it was, it could have been worse. We could have look something like this. This is the Texas-Louisiana border after Hurricane Rita went through. As you can see, it pretty much scrubbed that island clean. So as bad as Charley was, we could have been worse. This is a video. This is actually in Punta Gorda. Our conditions weren't a lot different. That's why we stress it makes absolutely no sense to stay in a storm. And after a storm, this is what we try to explain to the community. This is what we don't want. Obviously, we're not an urban area, but as you see the people in the lower right-hand corner walking through the water, like I had mentioned before, in a storm, you lose your lift stations, and then they're walking through water. It has all kinds of contaminants in it. There's just nothing safe about it. This is some lessons that we as a city learned. All of our employees are prepared to work outside of their regularly assigned duties. After we issued the evacuation, and right before Charley hit, we did a door-to-door post-evacuation check, and there was an older couple found in the west end of the island that they were both each other's caregivers. I believe one had dementia and one had diabetes or something of that nature, and they didn't even know the storm was coming. So if they made it through the storm itself, then they would have been facing 2 to 3 weeks without power, without constant or proper food supply, medicine, everything, so it could have been fatal for them. We also learned that the residents of Sanibel, they want information that's timely, accurate, and Sanibel specific. They want to know what happened to their houses. They want to know what happened to their community. We give these seminars in order to educate folks, because we know that the more homes and businesses prepare for evacuation, the more successful our job will be. As if we had a college class and we were doing a basic Hurricane 101 plan, we'd inform people that 5 days prior to expected landfall, we activate a timeline that kicks in certain responsibilities of everything we start to do. Each employee is responsible for complying with that. In the 5-day cone, employees are required to start preparing their houses earlier so that they can come back out here then and start with the city evacuation. We encourage all of our employees to install hurricane shutters if possible, have 1 gallon of water per day per person in their household. The last FEMA class I was at, the hurricane conference in Orlando, they're now recommending that you have enough food to last for 7 days after a storm. If you're going to evacuate your family from the area, if you don't do it at the 5-day period, you're going to have it's likely you might not be able to get it done, because the airlines start moving their assets, meaning the airplanes, out of the area when the hurricane is coming. You need to obtain some cash, because ATMs won't be working after a storm. Have things like flashlights, batteries, solar cell phone charger, 3 meals per day per family member, things that people don't realize that they might need: eyeglasses, medications, and a lot of the dry foods and so forth, they can be obtained at like Bass Pro Shops or Dick's Sporting Goods, or even online nowadays. What we do work related, each city department has a specific plan and how they're going to fill in and work and help the rest of the city in the preparations and evacuation. Essential employees like the police department, public works, and so forth, we have to bring enough clothes to stay for 3 days if necessary. And all employees are subject to reassignment. Our non-essential employees, they're required to touch base with the supervisor almost immediately after a storm passes through. As our friends from Lee County had mentioned, we encourage folks to have a family hurricane plan. Lee County has a family hurricane plan that's online. That's the cover of it. This is 1 or 2 of the sheets. You have a preparedness checklist. Create your own plans. There's a fire plan, a hurricane plan, some safety supplies you might need, basic tools, sanitation if you're going to be without power and water. Something as simple as wet wipes might be a big comfort. This is the Lee County Emergency Operations Center, the new building. It's about a year old now. And we bring this up because as a municipality in Lee County, when we request assistance from FEMA, the way it works is the federal assistance goes to the state, and then the state goes to every county. And for us to be reimbursed for the cost that we have, our requests have to go through Lee County. And there's about 106 or so workstations, and the one up in the very right corner, that chair in the very right corner, that's our workstation. That's where our emergency management technician Lance will be. The city has a hurricane action plan. That's an incremental timeline of preparedness leading up to the impact of the storm. And as I had said before, each city department is responsible for preparedness elements that lead up to the storm. This is the plan. It starts at basically 72 hours out and works all the way down to when the storm will be bearing down on us. This is the city's organizational chart in normal operations. You have city council that direct the city manager and city attorney, and then there are just the various departments underneath it. And this is the organization chart when we're operating under emergency status. I'd like to just point out to everybody, on the right-hand side, you see a box that says Temporary City Hall. If we evacuate, we go to the Crown Plaza at the Bell Tower, and that's where the whole city government is run from. Us as a police department, we maintain and facilitate the Hurricane Action Plan. We maintain professional contacts and relationships with the emergency management community. We improve the city's preparedness and safety through strategic planning and education. This is an educational opportunity for us to educate the public, and we have a strategic plan where we're always looking at things for what we can do for preparations and everything 1 year, 3 year, and 5 years down the line. The way we notify the community, we issue weather alerts. We're kept informed by Dave Roberts, our weather consultant, and we then in turn turn that information or push that information out into the community. We will issue those alerts through the city's Facebook page, Twitter account, and we do have the Code Red notification software that we had mentioned before. We have a partners meeting before the hurricane season starts. Some people or some other entities who would be at the partners meeting: the Lee County Sheriff's Office, Sanibel Fire and Rescue, Lee County Co-op, that's our electric company, Lee County EOC, the members are here today, and numerous others. It's probably 50 or 60 people come to our partners meeting. We do this either right before or right at the beginning of hurricane season every year, just so that we can all be on the same page and we can put faces to names and you have a relationship established with the people who would be helping you recover if a storm actually hits. And then this is what happens when we evacuate the city. The picture on the left are actually our dispatchers, and that is over at the Crown Plaza. This is when we evacuated for Charley. The picture on the right shows Councilman Harrity talking with some citizens. Activities while we're evacuated, we have to still maintain all of our city government activities at a separate location. We have community meetings, we brief the media, we license contractors, we issue hurricane passes, post pictures to the web if possible, if the infrastructure is in place. Sometimes we post damage photos on a bulletin board if it's not. In these pictures here, the top one shows the city manager hosting a meeting, and then the bottom shows some of the other city functions that are going on. I believe issuing licenses to contractors and so forth. And then after the storm passes through, we will re-enter. I'm sure a lot of people probably never realized that we had a message board out there that said Sanibel's closed. Initial re-entry is done by the police department, fire department, and EMS. Our main priorities are citizen safety, protection of property, and then clearing the roadways. Restoration of services such as electric, water, and sewer soon follow. Our island is divided into 10 zones. Re-entry of the public will depend on which zones are affected or inaccessible due to our recovery efforts. As I had mentioned before, when we came on the island after Charley, we intended to come down to the police department. We got about as far as the Lazy Flamingo, and trees were stacked up across the road 8 feet high or 10 feet high for like 100 yards. So we had to stop at that point and set up a command post. But if we had that sort of road blockage, say on at the beginning of Sanibel Captiva Road, we wouldn't issue people, or we wouldn't let the people in zones further along the island come back on, because we found that they come on the island and can't get to their homes, and they just kind of get stuck, and then they're frustrated. And our reentry hang tag that Lance Henninger is issuing, that helps in organizing that reentry. And speaking of the hang tags, why they're important, they maximize security measures while providing authorized persons access to a property. Hurricane hang tags expedite your return to Sanibel or Captiva. We would basically line all the people in with the hang tags up in the left lane and let them come through, just as if you do if you have a transponder now. And the hurricane hang tags assist us in our phased reentry back onto Sanibel and Captiva. This is a picture of the hang tags. The orange is the residential, the blue is the commercial. When we get back on the island, as Harold, or as we had mentioned before, one of the first things we have to do is search and rescue. That's a joint operation between the police and the fire department. We search every building on the island to see if there's anybody in there and if anybody is injured or needs help. Our recovery efforts. These are 3 quick bullets, but they took months of days that were anywhere from 13 hours to 18 hours a day. First thing we have to do is remove the vegetation so we can get along the roadways. Then we have to, just like I said, the power, the sewer, and the water. And then we try to return the community to normal as soon as possible. And security of the island. While all that's going on, we still have to basically run the police department, and even at a more stepped up level. We have 24-hour day coverage 7 days a week. We were assisted, as you can see in the picture, by a National Guardsman, but we were assisted by federal, state, county, and local law enforcement officers from throughout the state. We had deputies from up in the Panhandle come down and help us. We had officers from Gainesville Police Department come and help us. That's all part of our like the statewide emergency management network. And if their areas were affected either this year or in any of the years in the past and they put a request in, we would in kind go and help them also. So in conclusion, what we encourage you to do is make your family hurricane plan, get your plan in place because planning saves lives. Heed the evacuation warning. If we issue a mandatory evacuation warning, what we're saying is that it's more dangerous to your life to stay here than it is to leave. We understand that in a time of an emergency and with a storm bearing down on you, a person's natural inclination is to want to be home where you're safe. But if your home is on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico that the average elevation is only about 3.5 feet, you have to put that out of your mind and you have to evacuate. It's the sensible thing to do. And then obtain your reentry pass, and as soon as we're able to, we'll start bringing the community back in and bring everything back to normal. So that's a summary of what we do in emergency management for the citizens in the city of Sanibel. So at this point in time, I'd like to, we'll conclude the presentation part of the seminar, and the other members will step up front here and we'll open the floor up to any questions. And we'll have a young man bring a microphone, or we'll have a young man bring a microphone around to anyone who has any questions.
When you issue an evacuation plan, do you tell people how far away they need to evacuate? At what distance they're safe?
We'll show the cone where the dangers are, and we will instruct people that they should take themselves well out of that danger zone. We can't give you a specific spot to evacuate to, because if the storm turns, we'll say use good common sense and evacuate far away from the cone of certainty.
You said that the city of Sanibel sets themselves up at Bell Tower. Is that normally far enough away from Sanibel?
Well, it's certainly better than Barrier Island, but we also have plans in place. If there's a major storm coming at us, we may evacuate from the area also and then just return. But we have to take that on a storm-by-storm basis.
One of the things just to add about where to evacuate, if you consider that we're evacuating if it's a larger storm and you're going to be competing with what was the #2 hardest place to evacuate of Tampa Bay, one of the things that we often recommend people is to consider going across Alligator Alley so that you're not competing with those counties that are north of us. We're working really hard on a regional evacuation plan for these larger storms that are going to impact more than just Lee County. So we're going to be working with the state to open host shelters across the state, and we'll be sharing information about those open host shelters if we get into that bigger storm scenario.
A few years ago, there was an evacuation out of Houston that turned into an absolute disaster. There were heart attacks on the highway, people ran out of gasoline. It was just terrible and unnecessary. And you can't predict it. I guess that's the official way of silencing a dissenter. And you can't tell us that where we're evacuating to is much safer than where we're evacuating from. Have you ever considered using the library, City Hall, and the rec center, which are at a good elevation, as refuge centers right here on the island? It seems to me that it would be safer for a lot of us to stay here than it would be to take our chances with the traffic. There's more people die on I-75 than ever die in hurricanes.
Well, to answer the question, historically those buildings were set up so that they could handle the storm surge and winds. But let's say we decided we're going to let you stay there, then 3,000 other people want to stay there as well. And we can't guarantee that the wind's not going to tear the roof off and the surge isn't going to push the building away anyway. So no, we would never consider, if we had to evacuate Sanibel, we would never consider having a shelter on island that we would say is more safe than going off island. It's just not going to happen.
You know, I'd like to add another thought to that, because he makes a very good point. When you're trying to move hundreds of thousands of people, evacuate early, and if you catch wind of a storm, no pun intended, fill up your cars, because everybody else is going to go fill up their cars. For Dennis and Arlene and Cindy and Ivan in the Panhandle, they ran out of gas because everybody ran. They filled up their cars and they filled up all the jerry cans for their generators, and they were out of gas for several days because it took a while to get trucks in. If I were you, I would never have less than a half a tank of gas during hurricane season, and if I saw a storm coming, I'd fill up my car, and that way you can hopefully get a couple hundred miles inland before you run out of gas, because people are going to run out of gas. The other thing is the people that run out of gas tend to do so in the road in front of you, and now everybody has to stop and push them off to the side and help get them into other cars and take off again. And so again, the earlier you evacuate, the better off you're going to be, and you're going to be ahead of that. You're going to be ahead of that rush.
I'd also just like to add that the stated goal is for us to be safe. We don't want to keep people here and keep them in harm's way. If we're issuing a mandatory evacuation, the whole point is that we believe it's safer to go someplace else than stay here. And we would not want to have a mixed message that said it's time to evacuate, but you could go someplace on island. It's just inconsistent at best and is dangerous at worst. So no, we would not want anyone to shelter on place in Sanibel if there was a mandatory evacuation.
And one other point on that really quickly, just to let you guys know, our office has been working very hard the last couple of years because we are named the hardest place to evacuate. What we used to do is say, okay, Zone A looks like it needs to evacuate, so our plan is to do A and B just to be safe. And we can't do that anymore because Zone A has about 117,000 people. When you add Zone B, that's about 350,000 people. So between the two, we can't just broadly say, let's just evacuate because we think something's going to happen. So what we're doing is we built some new tools to help us better identify specifically how many people, and we're not going to be just overly evacuating because we think it's a good idea. It's truly because we feel it's going to be safer for you to leave than to stay.
Yeah, this is going to be our first hurricane season. And using Charley as an example, could you sort of reconstruct the timeline for the evacuation that was held on Sanibel? I mean, just so as an example.
Well, as an example of a hurricane, a major hurricane that we believed was bearing down on Sanibel, we started putting out press releases 6 days in advance, I believe. And we also had a recommended evacuation for hotels and resorts, which council made that into an order. That gave the hotel people an opportunity to get all the visitors off the island, and that was 3 days in advance of the hurricane. So the actual mandatory evacuation, I believe, was 48 hours before the storm projected to be hitting Sanibel. So there was quite a bit of leeway on the evacuation, both recommended and then mandatory.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I was here for Charley, where I came back on after Charley, and even as a property owner, you say, would we be safer to stay here? It's not just the storm. When we came back after Charley, it was a full week later before we were allowed back on the island. I mean, I'm talking 7 days. And when we got to the house, my house had 2 trees down, a couple screens blown out, and that was it. But my refrigerator was destroyed. My freezer was destroyed because it was sat without power for a week. It was moldy. It had worms in it. My water wasn't potable for 2 weeks, and I was lucky. Some people took even longer than 2 weeks. And I had no electricity. 7 days later, no electricity. 14 days later, no electricity. So if you've never been here in July or August without electricity, trust me, it's better at the Holiday Inn. Okay? I mean, it's just an unforgiving place to be without electricity and water. But I did want to ask, how many evacuations have we had since Charley?
Just one. I believe it was in 2005, and it lasted about 12 hours, and we put out the order the next morning that people could come back.
And we did have a question. Somebody asked me during the break about power restoration, and do we have a hotline that you can call to find information out? And I forgot to mention that we will be activating 211. On a day-to-day basis, you can dial 211 to get resources in the community. During an activation of the Emergency Operations Center for the county, that number gets transferred to the EOC, and we have United Way that staffs that. We give them information. They might not necessarily be able to tell you exactly when your house is going to have power, but they should be able to give you some general information. And as we get closer to that time, we have the power companies there and the EOC that can be sharing that information. So not only just for power restoration, but if you're looking for which shelters that are open, where the points of distribution are for food, just keep in mind that you can dial 211 and get that information.
Whoever has the mic, please.
Yes. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm down from New Jersey. This is my first vacation since Sandy, and I came to your beautiful island. I just want to say how prepared you are and how unprepared we were. As a compliance state officer and now a floodplain manager for the last 10 years, working with the OEMs, state police, and prosecutor's office going in after a storm. But seeing some of your devastation that you had here and along the coast, we learn a lot. Most of our education comes from the 480 NFIP, and your FEMA maps comes out of Dade County. So all of our education comes from here, and it works its way up to where we are in New York, New Jersey. Your preparedness today is nothing like what we're doing in our area. Just asking, maybe I can get a slides that you're doing here today, because we certainly could use this information. Our storms are not as devastating. We do have a few more days than you do, especially if it hits your coast and it works its way up. When it gets to New Jersey, we're in a cove area. This particular storm turned around, made a left turn, and we had just a surge, no wind, no rain. So our OEMs and our NOAA folks told us what to do, what to beware of. But our evacuation was excellent. We lost a lot of lives. So I urge you to take this preparedness and spread it, because we need this up in New Jersey. And this is my vacation. I'm down here. I met the building inspector, but I drive around to see what your BFEs are and where your houses are going. And it's nice to see that you are taking all this advice in. It's a tough sell in New Jersey because it costs a lot to do everything that we do, but certainly it's moving up because of your education. Thank you.
I wanted to add something, and thank you. And New Jersey got hammered, and as a resident of Barnegat Light, New Jersey for 3 years, it broke my heart to see what happened to that seashore. Yeah, I ran a little Coast Guard station there back in the 80s. I did want to build on something that Sandra mentioned, the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. I don't know if you all know this, but Lee County has a state-of-the-art Emergency Operations Center out on Ortiz Avenue. It was just opened last year. It is a phenomenal facility. What I didn't tell you was I worked for the Department of Defense for 5 years from the time I left the Coast Guard until I came here. This Emergency Operations Center is better equipped than most Department of Defense major command, intelligence, or operations centers. This thing is phenomenal. And the reason that's important for you is that there's over 100 people there that represent anything you could be interested in the county. The Red Cross, the finance, the power company, anybody you can think of that you want information from, they have a representative in there, the folks that are running the shelters. And they are in there with us inside the bunker, which can take 200-mile-an-hour winds, and we can be self-contained for 7 days, so no worries. And so I wanted you to understand what a great resource you have, because we are all together working together with our citizens to get things open again. So if you wonder, well, where does everybody go and how do they do it? This Emergency Operations Center is phenomenal, and I just wanted you to know that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this may be a foolish question, but I wondered if there's some way that you determine when you're going to have a evacuation order. In other words, it's like you expect a 6-foot surge, or it's going to be a 110-mile-an-hour wind. Maybe you could lend some light on that.
Well, the good news is everything we think, we're going to tell you when we're about to evacuate. Between the weather people on TV and the press releases that the city and the county put out, you'll be well aware of what we're thinking before we actually make an order. So what we're thinking is going to be different every time based on the direction of the storm, the intensity of the storm, the surge that we're anticipating. And like we've been discussing up here, each storm is different. So we can't tell you if a storm's 3 miles to the south of Key West that you should do this or that. So we recommend that you pay attention to what your city officials and county officials are telling you, and you'll be as informed as we are, quite frankly, because we will give you all the information that we have, because ultimately we want to make sure that you're safe. That's the reason why we do this. So we're not holding anything back. We make collaborative decisions between the county and the weather consultants and the city, and we inform the public as soon as we can have the information necessary to make the right decision. Yeah.
I want to introduce myself because I haven't spoken yet. My name is Rob Farmer. I'm the Director of Public Safety for Lee County. To your question also, there's a lot of new advances that come out of the National Hurricane Center this year. Dave spoke of some of them, and that is a much more accurate ability to predict storm surge in particular. In our office, in the Office of Emergency Management for Lee County, one of our focuses has gotten away from calling for a just-in-case evacuation. To your point, they're just evacuating us just in case. That is no longer the case. We now we have a very complex decision-making matrix to help us with prediction tools from the National Hurricane Center to decide when exactly to or not to call for evacuations. Because what we don't want to do is cry wolf. We don't want to send everybody out of the county just in case the storm comes this way. We want to have a high level of reliability in the information that we have to make those decisions, so it's good for you to know that when we call for an evacuation, it's for a reason. All of these tools that we have to put together are what are leading us to make the decision of, yes, we do need to evacuate. This is not just a, golly, it just doesn't feel right, let's do it. There's a lot of science behind our decisions, okay? One other thing I wanted to add to what I've heard from a couple other folks is to understand the reality of an evacuation mandation. If from the county and from the city you hear an order to evacuate, the one gentleman said that, off the island for 7 days before you could come back on. That's a really long time if you try to decide to ride out a storm in your home. Remember that during that evacuation order time, there are no services available to you. Other things happen to you while you're riding out that storm. You might hurt yourself. You might have chest pain. You might get injured in some way. Police, fire, emergency medical services are unavailable, especially during the peak of the storm. Once those storm winds reach a sustained level, those services stop, because we have to protect our folks, we have to protect our assets, and make sure that all of our people and stuff are safe. We're going on the assumption that you've made the right choice and left. Now, we're going to all be safe. Once it's safe for us to do so, we'll then be able to redeploy emergency services back to the evacuation areas. So if you're out on the island and there's 100-mile-an-hour winds and you start having chest pain and you call 911, we'll write your name down and we'll know that you're there. And as soon as we can, safely, we'll get back out to you. So that's important for people to realize. That's a kind of a consequence people don't often think about, is the luxuries of service that you are provided every day are going to be unavailable for the safety of all of those that are going to come and save you. Okay? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you have an allowable wind speed for the bridge. In other words, if you have a top wind speed of 50 miles an hour, are you going to be able to get off the bridge?
The wind speed determinant to close the Sanibel Bridge is typically led by the Department of Transportation for the county. And I don't know the number off the top of my head.
I want to say it's...
Is it 40?
45.
45 miles, sustained 45-mile-an-hour winds is what I'm hearing.
Right.
So I would say that's going to be a pretty close guess. So once those sustained winds, remember, not gusting winds, but the sustained uninterrupted winds of 45 miles an hour or greater, by that point the bridge will be shut down. And that's not only for the safety of the bridge itself, but for those traveling across it.
I just wanted to mention that in anticipation of a storm, that is not the time to come back to Sanibel and try to do things that you should have done previous to your departure. And I don't know if everybody realizes that once you issue that evacuation order, that's one-way traffic off the island. Is that not right?
No, we don't generally implement one-way traffic unless there's such a need for the additional lanes to evacuate everybody. So we have a plan that we can one-way it, but we have not yet ever had to do that. Anybody else? Wait till you get the microphone.
From the Lee County homepage, where do we go to find the family plan checklist?
Should be right on that front page. There should be a link over, I want to say it's on the left-hand side. Does that sound right? Yeah, the left-hand side.
And if you don't see it on just going to the general county website, you can go directly to that leeeoc.com, and that'll take you right, that'll put you right to it. LeeEOC, Emergency Operations Center.com. Yeah.
So, say we heed all the warnings, we're evacuated, and where do we go? Are we just going to watch the cone of uncertainty, or are you going to be offering advice, go north, go south, go to Miami, that type of information?
So what we don't do is politely tell you where to go. What we want you to do, what our focus is to get you out of what we have determined to be harm's way here. What you'll want to do is pay very close attention to media. Where is the path, where is the storm coming from? Where is the storm potentially going? And if you look at that error cone, or the cone of uncertainty, they more politely call it, you want to be outside of that, because with a reasonable expectation, the storm is going to follow that path once it impacts and tracks onto the ground. So, and is an inland storm at that point. You'll want to be outside of that. If it looks like Charley, like it's going to go up the state, think about going across the alley to the southern tip of, Miami, that kind of area. If it's coming in from Miami and straight across the island towards us, well, that's, another factor to think of. You want to be outside of that cone of error, or the cone of uncertainty.
So one more question is portable generators. It's not on the all-hazard supply kit, I don't think. Is that something that's useful or practically not?
Absolutely. If you're in a storm where you get to where we're not ordering evacuations and we have power losses and utility losses, a portable generator is going to save a lot of your personal property by keeping your refrigerators running, keeping, potentially if you have a well, your well running, those types of things. So that's, again, not something you want to buy right as the storm's coming, because they get a little pricey right before the storm's coming.
And whatever you do, don't put it in your garage, don't put it in your lanai. It's got to be away from the house so you don't have those carbon monoxide fumes coming in. They will kill you.
Yes, my
At least
question.
50 feet.
Excuse me, my question is on re-entry. I believe I heard you say that there are various zones on the island, and as you come down Summerlin heading to the toll plaza, when will you know that you can get into your zone or your area?
When the city gives out the press release that we are going to start re-entry, we will specifically state which zones we are going to permit back on the island, and that would be called our phased re-entry. Now, we may or may not have to do a phased re-entry, and we might do just a general re-entry. But again, if there's part of the island that's damaged, we may limit the re-entry of those zones to not come back because they would have no place to go. So you just pay attention to the press release, and we would state which zones would be re-entering. Patty?
I just wanted to thank you for reiterating the point about the safety of staying, the lack of safety of staying on the island. And I was here for Charley, and we had very good friends that stayed here on the island while we evacuated. And some of the stories that people expected from the city staff and from police were just mind-boggling. And I think in respect for our emergency management people, I think it's really important that we evacuate and we follow the rules, because it's not fair to expect people to come rescue pets and get medicine and, come help you in an emergency because you've chosen to make the unwise decision when it was a mandatory evacuation. So I just want to you and encourage everybody to do so.
Yeah, I just, it might not be in the context of this, but we always think about if I happen to get a hotel, is there any protection, consumer protection for what they charge you? Let's say you're going to be there 7 days. I don't know who to report or to find out. Thank you.
There are anti-gouging laws on the books, so I don't believe that the local establishments are going to raise the rates higher than they're permitted to. They have certain matrix, I believe, that they're allowed to use by state. And there's anti-gouging laws that it's really, quite frankly, not worth going up against. So there is some protection.
If you do encounter that and you're in Lee County, you can call that 211 line that we talked to you about. We have one of the seats in the Emergency Operations Center is the Visitor and Convention Bureau. And they work very closely with our hotels to kind of keep track of how much space is left. So they know a lot of the upper management of those organizations. And just go ahead and let us know, and we'll see if we can handle something on our end if you encounter that.
Okay, and two things that came up also during this question and answer. One was the concern about your refrigerators being ruined. We did learn that during Hurricane Charley, and in 2005 when we evacuated, we did set up dumpsters on Causeway Road so that people who did choose to evacuate and wanted to empty their refrigerators, they could have a place to dump their perishables so that they didn't have to worry about that in the eventuality that power was lost. So that was a lesson learned as well. And one of the most important things that we find is that during a recovery phase, contractors do get a little difficult to find. But you really need to make sure that you get a licensed contractor to do your work. Because most of the complaints I had for the first month after we did do the recovery and start re-entering was people hiring contractors that charged them money up front and then they disappeared and they lost their investment. Or they did subpar work and they had to have it redone anyway. So if you do come across that type of situation, you can always file a complaint, but it's easier to get a good contractor that's licensed first. And on the city's website, we have the current list of licensed contractors that are authorized to do work on Sanibel. So be aware of that. And I guess other than that, I'm happy you all came out, and thank you very much.